What would you do if you traveled thousands of miles to marry a stranger, only to discover he'd been murdered 3 days before your arrival? If you've ever felt completely lost and alone in a hostile place, this story is for you. And I promise, what happened next will restore your faith in unexpected kindness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach rattled violently over the rocky terrain, throwing Elizabeth Caldwell against the wooden interior for what felt like the 100th time that day. Dust billowed through the windows, coating her carefully pressed lavender traveling dress and clinging to her dark hair, despite the protective netting she wore. After 3 weeks of trains, riverboats, and now this bone-jarring coach, she was finally approaching Silver Creek, Arizona territory, where her new life awaited. Elizabeth clutched the worn leather satchel containing all her worldly possessions. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a silver hairbrush, and the stack of letters from Henry Morton, the man she was traveling to marry. His words had painted a picture of a thriving cattle ranch, a respectable position in the growing community, and a desire for an educated wife who could help establish Silver Creek as more than just another frontier town. At 31, Elizabeth had few prospects left in Boston. The war between the states had claimed her fiancé, and years of caring for her ailing mother had left her past the age most men considered marriageable. When she'd seen Henry's advertisement in the Boston Herald seeking a mature, educated woman of good character, it had seemed like divine providence. The coach lurched to a stop, nearly sending Elizabeth tumbling from her seat. Through the dust-caked window, she could make out a collection of weathered buildings clustered along a single main street. Silver Creek was smaller than she'd imagined, more outposts than town, with perhaps 24 structures visible in the harsh afternoon sun. "Silver Creek," the driver shouted, his gravelly voice carrying over the wind. "End of the line." Elizabeth gathered her belongings with trembling hands. This was it, the moment she'd been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. She smoothed her dress, adjusted her hat, and stepped down from the coach into the blazing Arizona heat. The town seemed deserted, save for a mangy dog sleeping in the shade of a water trough and an old man rocking on the porch of what appeared to be a general store. No welcoming committee, no Henry Morton waiting with flowers as she'd secretly hoped. Perhaps he was delayed at the ranch. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man with skin like leather, hefted her trunk from the boot and dropped it unceremoniously in the dust. "Morton Place is about 5 miles north," he said, eyeing her with something between pity and curiosity. "Though I reckon you'll want to speak with Sheriff Rawlins first." "The sheriff?" Elizabeth's heart quickened. "Is something wrong?" The driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt, avoiding her gaze. "Best you hear it from him, ma'am. His office is right there, next to the saloon." Before Elizabeth could ask more questions, the driver climbed back onto his perch and snapped the reins. The coach rumbled away, leaving her standing alone in the dusty street with her trunk and a growing sense of unease. The sheriff's office was a small adobe building with iron bars on the windows. Elizabeth approached it hesitantly, her traveling boots clicking on the wooden boardwalk. Through the open door, she could see a broad-shouldered man bent over a desk, his silver star glinting in the sunlight that streamed through the window. "Sheriff Rawlins?" she called softly. The man looked up, his weathered face registering surprise, then something else. Sympathy? He rose from his chair, removing his hat to reveal salt and pepper hair. "You must be Miss Caldwell," he said, his voice gentle despite its roughness. "Henry's intended." "Yes, I am." Elizabeth stepped into the office, grateful for the shade. "The stagecoach driver said I should speak with you. Has something happened to Henry?" Sheriff Rawlins gestured to a chair. "Please, sit down, Miss Caldwell." The gravity in his tone made Elizabeth's legs weak. She sank into the offered chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What is it? What's happened?" The sheriff sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "There's no easy way to say this, ma'am. Henry Morton was killed 3 days ago, shot in the back while checking his fence lines." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Elizabeth gripped the arms of the chair, trying to process the sheriff's words. "Killed? But I just received a letter from him 2 weeks ago. He was expecting me. We were to be married tomorrow." "I know, and I'm mighty sorry." Sheriff Rawlins poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. "We've been trying to send word to Boston, but these things take time out here." Elizabeth accepted the water with numb fingers. "Who did it? Why?" "We're not certain. Yet could be rustlers, could be someone with a grudge. Henry had his share of enemies. Successful ranchers usually do." The sheriff leaned against his desk, studying her with concern. "Do you have anywhere to go, Miss Caldwell? Family back east?" The full weight of her situation crashed down upon her. She was alone in a frontier town, thousands of miles from home, with barely enough money for a meal, let alone return passage to Boston. And even if she could afford to go back, what awaited her there? She'd sold everything to make this journey, burned her bridges in pursuit of a new life. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I have nothing to go back to." Sheriff Rawlins nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "There's a boarding house at the end of Main Street. Mrs. Hobbs runs a clean place, and she might have work for you until you figure things out." Elizabeth stood on shaky legs, smoothing her dust-covered dress with trembling hands. "Thank you, Sheriff. I suppose I should make arrangements." As she turned to leave, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both look toward the door. A rider appeared, his horse's flanks lathered with sweat from hard riding. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his movements speaking of a lifetime in the saddle. He was tall and lean, with skin the color of burnished copper and hair as black as a raven's wing, worn long and tied back with a leather cord. His features bore the distinctive blend of two worlds, high cheekbones and deep-set eyes that marked his native ancestry, combined with the square jaw and strong nose of his European heritage. He wore traditional rancher's clothing, but around his neck hung a small medicine pouch on a leather thong. "Sheriff," the man said, his voice deep and measured, "found another dead steer on the North Range. Same as the others. Throat cut, brand removed." Sheriff Rawlins cursed under his breath. "That's the third this week. Any tracks?" "Nothing useful. Whoever's doing this knows how to cover their trail." The man's dark eyes shifted to Elizabeth, taking in her traveling clothes and pale face with quick assessment. "This Henry's bride, Miss Elizabeth Caldwell," the sheriff confirmed. "Just arrived from Boston." The stranger removed his hat, revealing more of his striking features. "Nathan Blackwood," he introduced himself. "I own the Double B Ranch neighboring Henry's spread." His gaze softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. Henry was a good man." Elizabeth nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. There was something in Nathan Blackwood's eyes, a depth of understanding that suggested he knew something about loss himself. "What will happen to Henry's ranch?" Nathan asked the sheriff, though his eyes remained on Elizabeth. "His sister in California is his only kin. I've sent word, but it'll be weeks before we hear back. Until then." Sheriff Rawlins shrugged. "The hands are keeping things running, but without someone in charge, the vultures will start circling." Nathan's jaw tightened. "They already have. Caught 2 of Carson's men cutting fence wire yesterday." "Carson?" Elizabeth found her voice. "Who is that?" The 2 men exchanged glances. "Josiah Carson owns the biggest spread in the territory," Sheriff Rawlins explained. "He's been trying to buy out the smaller ranchers for years. Henry refused to sell. And now Henry's conveniently dead," Nathan added, his tone hard, "along with 2 other ranchers who wouldn't sell." A chill ran down Elizabeth's spine despite the heat. She'd expected challenges in her new life, but not this. Not murder and range wars and dangerous men willing to kill for land. "I should go," she said, suddenly desperate to be away from talk of death and violence. "The boarding house, you said?" "I'll escort you," Nathan offered, replacing his hat. "Mrs. Hobbs is particular about who she rents to. My recommendation might help." Elizabeth hesitated, unsure about accepting help from this stranger, but Sheriff Rawlins nodded encouragingly. "Nathan's one of the few men in this territory I trust completely, Miss Caldwell. You'll be safe with him." Outside, the afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the dusty street. Nathan retrieved Elizabeth's trunk with an ease that belied its weight and secured it to his horse. "It's not far," he said, offering his arm. "We can walk." As they made their way down the boardwalk, Elizabeth was acutely aware of the curious stares from the few people they passed. She wondered what they saw. A proper Eastern lady in her travel-worn finery, walking beside a man who clearly carried the blood of two peoples in his veins. "How long have you lived here, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from genuine curiosity. "All my life. My father came west in '49, seeking gold. He found my mother instead. She was Apache from the White Mountain Band." A slight smile touched his lips. "He used to say she was worth more than all the gold in California." "And your ranch?" "Built it myself. Started with nothing but a dozen head of cattle and a lot of determination." His voice carried quiet pride. "The Double B isn't the biggest spread, but it's mine." They reached a two-story frame house with Hobbs Boarding House painted in neat letters above the door. Before they could knock, a stout woman with grey hair and sharp eyes appeared on the porch. "Nathan Blackwood," she said, her tone a mixture of surprise and wariness. "What brings you to my establishment?" "Mrs. Hobbs, this is Miss Elizabeth Caldwell. She's just arrived from Boston and needs lodging." The woman's expression shifted as she took in Elizabeth's appearance and Nathan's presence. "Henry Morton's. Intended. I heard she was coming." Her eyes narrowed. "Also heard what happened to Henry. Terrible business." "Do you have a room available?" Nathan asked. Mrs. Hobbs hesitated, glancing between them. "I do, but, well, it's $2 a week, paid in advance. Meals included." Elizabeth's heart sank. She had exactly $3.40 to her name. After paying for the room, she'd have barely enough for one more week. As if reading her thoughts, Nathan spoke quietly. "Put it on my account. Mrs. Hobbs, Miss Caldwell's had enough troubles for one day." "I couldn't possibly," Elizabeth began, but Nathan cut her off with a look. "Consider it a loan," he said. "You can repay me when you're settled." Pride warred with practicality. Elizabeth had always paid her own way, but what choice did she have? She nodded reluctantly. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I'll repay you as soon as I'm able." Mrs. Hobbs showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor, with a narrow bed, washstand, and a window overlooking the street. After the woman left, Elizabeth sank onto the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to fall. She was alone in a hostile land, her dreams of marriage and security shattered, dependent on the charity of strangers. What would become of her now? The question echoed in her mind as the sun set over Silver Creek, painting the sky in shades of red and gold, beautiful and alien as the land itself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning dawned bright and merciless, the Arizona sun already heating the air by the time Elizabeth descended to the boarding house dining room. Her black morning dress, hastily retrieved from the bottom of her trunk, drew sympathetic glances from the other boarders. Two traveling salesmen, an elderly widow, and a young schoolteacher named Sarah Mills. "You must be Miss Caldwell," Sarah said, gesturing to an empty chair beside her. She was perhaps 25, with kind blue eyes and wheat-colored hair. "I'm so sorry about Mr. Morton. I teach his ranch hands children sometimes. They all spoke." Highly of him. Elizabeth accepted the seat gratefully. Thank you. Did you know him well? Well enough. He was one of the few ranchers who insisted his workers' children get schooling. Sarah lowered her voice. Between you and me, I think he was lonely. He talked about your letters often. The revelation brought fresh tears to Elizabeth's eyes. She'd grown fond of Henry through their correspondence, and knowing he'd shared their connection with others made his loss more acute. Mrs. Hobbs appeared with coffee and biscuits. There's a town meeting at noon, she announced. Sheriff Rawlins wants everyone there. Something about the recent troubles. After breakfast, Elizabeth ventured out to explore Silver Creek properly. The town was larger than her first impression suggested, with several businesses lining the main street. A mercantile, blacksmith, livery stable, 2 saloons, and a small church at the far end. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still. Touched with snow despite the valley's heat, at the mercantile she inquired about employment. The proprietor, Mr. Pritchard, shook his head regretfully. Times are hard, miss. With all the trouble lately, folks aren't spending much. What kind of trouble? Elizabeth asked, though she suspected she knew. Cattle theft, cut fences, poisoned water holes. 3 ranchers dead in as many months. He leaned closer. Most folks think Josiah Carson's behind it, but proving it's another matter. The church bell tolled noon, and Elizabeth joined the stream of people heading to the town hall, a modest adobe building that doubled as a courthouse. Inside she found a seat near the back, noting how the crowd seemed divided. Well-dressed townspeople occupied one side, while rougher-looking men in work clothes filled the other. Sheriff Rawlins called for order. Folks, we need to address what's happening. 3 murders, countless acts of sabotage. This isn't random. Of violence, it's a campaign to drive out the smaller ranchers. A tall man in an expensive suit stood. Elizabeth recognized the type. She'd seen plenty of his kind in Boston's financial district. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power, from his tailored clothes to his carefully groomed silver hair. Now, Sheriff, the man said, his voice smooth as oil. That's quite an accusation. I'm Josiah Carson, and I resent the implication that I'm involved in these unfortunate events. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elizabeth studied Carson with growing unease. His eyes were cold, calculating, like a snake considering its prey. Nobody's accusing you directly, Mr. Carson, Sheriff Rawlins replied carefully, but it's mighty convenient that every dead rancher refused your offers to buy their land. Carson spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. I'm a businessman. I make offers. If people choose not to sell, that's their right. But this territory is changing. The railroad's coming through next year. Those who can't adapt will be left behind. Nathan Blackwood stood from his position near the wall. And those who resist will end up like Henry Morton, shot in the back. The tension in the room escalated instantly. Carson's men shifted, hands moving closer to their weapons. Nathan stood calm but ready, his own hand resting casually near his gun belt. Careful, Blackwood, Carson said, his genial mask slipping. Slander's a serious offense. So is murder. Sheriff Rawlins stepped between them. Enough! This meeting's about finding solutions, not starting fights. He turned to address the crowd. I'm forming a citizens' committee to patrol the ranches. We need volunteers. Several hands went up, including Nathan's. Elizabeth noticed that none of Carson's men volunteered. After the meeting dispersed, Elizabeth found herself face to face with Josiah Carson in the street. Up close, he was even more imposing. Well over 6 feet tall, with the build of a man who'd once worked hard before. Wealth softened him. Miss Caldwell, isn't it? He tipped his hat. My condolences on your loss. Henry Morton was stubborn, but I respected that. Thank you, Elizabeth replied coolly. I understand you're in difficult circumstances. His smile didn't reach his eyes. A woman alone in a frontier town, no family, no means of support. It's a precarious position. Elizabeth's spine stiffened. "I'll manage." "I'm sure you will, but if you need assistance, my door is always open. I could use someone with your obvious refinement at my ranch. Hosting, correspondence, that sort of thing." The offer sounded generous, but something in his tone made her skin crawl. Before she could respond, Nathan appeared at her elbow. "Miss Caldwell has options," he said firmly. "She doesn't need your charity, Carson." Carson's eyes narrowed. "Always. The White Knight, aren't you, Blackwood? Though I'd think twice about getting involved. Bad things happen to people who interfere in my business. Is that a threat? A friendly warning?" Carson touched his hat brim again. "Good day, Miss Caldwell. Remember my offer." After he left, Elizabeth turned to Nathan. "Thank you, but I can handle myself." "I don't doubt it. But Carson's dangerous. He wants something from you." "What could I possibly have that he wants?" Nathan's expression darkened. "Henry's ranch. As his intended, you might have a claim. Carson would love to get control of that land. It has the best water rights in the valley." Elizabeth hadn't considered this angle. "But we weren't married. I have no legal claim." "Maybe not. But Carson doesn't know that, and even the possibility might be enough to make you valuable or dangerous to him." That evening, Elizabeth sat in her room, counting her remaining money and considering her options. The stark reality of her situation was becoming clear. Without employment, she'd be destitute within weeks. Carson's offer, distasteful as it was, might be her only choice. A knock at her door interrupted her grim thoughts. Sarah Mills stood in the hallway holding a basket. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. "Mrs. Hobbs's suppers are barely enough to keep a bird alive." Gratefully, Elizabeth invited her in. Over cold chicken and fresh bread, she found herself confiding in the young teacher. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I can't go back to Boston, but I can't stay here without work." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "What skills do you have?" "I can read and write, of course. I kept books for my father's business before the war. I'm good with numbers, and I can sew." "The school board's been talking about hiring someone to teach the older students," Sarah said thoughtfully. "I handle the younger ones, but we need someone for mathematics and literature. It doesn't pay much, but it's respectable work." But flickered in Elizabeth's chest. "Do you think they'd consider me?" "I'll speak to Reverend Thompson tomorrow. He heads the board." Sarah hesitated. "There's something else. Nathan Blackwood mentioned you might need somewhere more permanent to stay. He has a small cottage on his property, used to be his foreman's before the man moved on. It's empty now." Elizabeth frowned. "Why would he offer that to me? He barely knows me. Nathan's complicated. He's lived between two worlds his whole life, too white for the Apache, too Apache for the whites. Maybe he recognizes something in you, another outsider trying to find their place." The next morning brought two visitors. First, Reverend Thompson arrived to discuss the teaching position. He was a thin, earnest man with spectacles and a gentle manner. "Miss Mills speaks highly of your qualifications," he said. "We can offer $12 a month plus room and board with one of the church families." It wasn't much, but it was honest work. Elizabeth accepted immediately. Her second visitor was Nathan Blackwood. He stood in the boarding house parlor, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the formal setting. "I hear you've taken the teaching position," he said. "Congratulations." "News travels fast. It's a small town." He shifted his weight. "About that cottage Sarah mentioned, it's yours if you want it. No rent. I just need someone to keep it maintained." Elizabeth studied him carefully. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Blackwood?" He met her gaze directly. "Because I know what it's like to be alone in a hostile place. Because Henry was my friend, and he'd want someone looking out for you. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because Carson's interest in you worries me. That cottage is on my land, protected, you'd be safer there. I can't accept charity. Then don't. Help with the ranch accounts in exchange. My foreman's good with cattle but terrible with numbers. It was a practical arrangement, one that preserved her dignity while providing security. Still, Elizabeth hesitated. What will people say? A single woman living on your property. Let them talk. This is the frontier, not Boston. Besides, Sarah Mills lives in the main house. She rents a room from me. You won't be alone. The revelation surprised her. Sarah hadn't mentioned this connection. I'll need to think about it. Of course. But don't wait too long. Carson's not a patient man. That night, Elizabeth lay awake, weighing her options. The teaching position solved her immediate financial concerns, but Nathan's offer provided something more valuable: protection. In the land where 3 men had been murdered over water rights, security wasn't a luxury. The morning brought her decision and an unexpected confrontation. As she packed her belongings, preparing to move to Nathan's cottage, Josiah Carson appeared. At the boarding house. Leaving us so soon, Miss Caldwell. His smile held no warmth. I found employment and lodging, thank you. At the Double B Ranch, I hear. Carson's eyes hardened. Interesting choice. You should know that Blackwood's days in this valley are numbered. The railroad's coming, and progress won't be stopped by one half-breed playing at being a rancher. The slur made Elizabeth's blood boil. Mr. Blackwood seems quite successful to me, for now. But accidents happen. Fences get cut. Cattle disappear. Carson stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're an intelligent woman, Miss Caldwell. Choose your allies carefully. Before Elizabeth could respond, Nathan appeared in the doorway. Problem here. Carson straightened, his mask of civility sliding back into place. Just offering Miss Caldwell some friendly advice. She doesn't need your advice. Nathan's voice was steady, but Elizabeth sensed the tension coiled within him. Carson laughed. We'll see about that. He tipped his hat to Elizabeth. Remember what I said, miss. My offer stands. After he left, Nathan helped Elizabeth load her trunk onto his wagon. Neither spoke until they were clear of town, heading north toward the Double B. He won't give up, Nathan finally said. Carson wants that land corridor, and now he sees you as either an obstacle or an opportunity. Elizabeth watched the desert landscape roll by, so different from Boston's crowded streets. Then we'll have to make sure he sees me as an obstacle he can't remove. Nathan glanced at her with something like admiration. Henry wrote that you had spirit. He was right. As they approached the Double B Ranch, Elizabeth felt a strange sense of homecoming. The main house sat on a rise, overlooking a valley dotted with cattle. The cottage, her new home, stood nearby, small but well-built, with a porch facing the mountains. Welcome to the Double B, Nathan said softly. Whatever happens next, you're not alone anymore. Elizabeth looked at the land stretching before her, harsh and beautiful, dangerous and full of promise. She'd come west, seeking a new life, and found instead a mystery wrapped in death and greed. But perhaps, with unexpected allies and her own determination, she could still build something worthwhile from the ashes of her original dreams. Elizabeth's first week at the Double B Ranch passed in a blur of adjustment. The cottage, though small, was infinitely more comfortable than the boarding house. It had 2 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen corner and a separate bedroom, plus a small root cellar for storage. Sarah Mills helped her settle in, bringing curtains, extra linens, and a steady stream of local gossip. People are talking, of course, Sarah said one evening as they shared tea on the cottage porch. A mysterious Eastern woman living on Nathan Blackwood's ranch. The gossip mill is working overtime. Let them talk, Elizabeth replied, echoing Nathan's earlier words. I have work to do. Indeed, she'd thrown herself into her new responsibilities with determination. Mornings were spent at the schoolhouse, teaching arithmetic and literature to a dozen older students. Afternoons found her at the main ranch house, poring over ledgers and accounts that hadn't been properly maintained in months. "Your foreman, Jake Sullivan, is excellent with cattle," she told Nathan during one of their evening meetings, "but his bookkeeping leaves much to be desired. You've been losing money on feed purchases for months." Nathan studied the figures she'd prepared, his expression growing darker. "Carson owns the feed store. I suspected he was overcharging, but I couldn't prove it." "Now you can." Elizabeth pointed to her meticulous calculations. "He's been padding invoices by nearly 30%. Their working relationship developed naturally, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Nathan treated her as an equal, valuing her education and business acumen. Elizabeth, in turn, found herself admiring his quiet strength and the way he managed his ranch with both firmness and compassion. One afternoon, while organizing supply receipts, Elizabeth discovered something troubling. "Nathan," she called from the office, "you need to see this." He appeared in the doorway, dust-covered from a day of riding fence lines. "What is it?" "These receipts from the assay office, they're for soil samples taken from Henry Morton's property." She spread the papers across the desk. "They're dated 2 weeks before his death." Nathan's eyes narrowed as he examined the documents. Carson had Henry's land tested for minerals? Not just tested. Look at the results. Elizabeth pointed to the bottom line. Significant silver deposits, the kind that would make that land worth 10 times its ranching value. The implications hung heavy in the air. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, leaving dusty streaks. "If Henry knew about this, he would never have sold," Elizabeth finished. "Which means Carson had a powerful motive for murder. We need to show these to Sheriff Rawlins." But the sheriff, when presented with the evidence the next day, seemed troubled rather than excited. "It's suspicious, I grant you," he said, studying the receipts. "But it's not proof of murder. Carson could claim he was doing routine surveys of the area." "On private property?" Elizabeth challenged. "Without the owner's permission? Hard to prove either way now." The sheriff sighed. "Look, I want to catch Henry's killer as much as anyone, but I need solid evidence, not speculation." Frustrated, but undeterred, Elizabeth and Nathan began their own investigation. They spent evenings mapping out the attacks on local ranches, looking for patterns. A picture emerged. Every targeted ranch sat along the proposed railroad route or had valuable water rights. "Carson's creating a monopoly," Nathan concluded one night as they worked by lamplight. "Control the water and the railroad access, and you control the whole valley." Elizabeth traced the route on their makeshift map. "Henry's ranch is the key. It has both water and sits directly on the proposed line, which is why Carson needs it so badly." Nathan's voice was grim. "And why anyone standing in his way is in danger." Their investigation took on new urgency when Sarah burst into the cottage one evening, breathless with news. "The railroad surveyor's in town," she announced. "He's staying at Carson's ranch, and they're meeting with investors tomorrow." Nathan's expression darkened. "If Carson secures the railroad contract before we can prove what he's done, then he wins," Elizabeth finished, "and all evidence of his crimes gets buried under progress and profit." The next morning, Elizabeth made a bold decision. Dressing in her finest remaining gown, she presented herself at Carson's ranch under the pretense of reconsidering his employment offer. "Miss Caldwell," Carson greeted her with obvious pleasure. "I'm delighted you've come to your senses. I've been thinking about our conversation," she said carefully, "about adapting to changing times." Carson's smile widened. "Excellent. Come, let me show you around." The tour provided exactly what Elizabeth hoped, a chance to observe Carson's operation and overhear fragments of conversation about the railroad deal. She memorized every detail, the maps on his study wall, the names of investors mentioned in passing, the casual references to removing obstacles. But her snooping nearly proved disastrous when she lingered too long near Carson's private office. Voices inside grew suddenly quiet, and footsteps approached the door. Elizabeth quickly grabbed a nearby vase, pretending to admire it just as Carson emerged with two well-dressed men. "Ah, Miss Caldwell, admiring my collection?" His eyes held suspicion. "It's lovely," she managed. "Chinese, isn't it? You have a good eye." But his tone remained wary. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Caldwell, newly arrived from Boston." The men nodded politely, but Elizabeth sensed their impatience. She'd interrupted something important. "I should go," she said quickly. "Thank you for the tour, Mr. Carson, but we haven't discussed your position." "Perhaps another time. I have classes to prepare." She left quickly, feeling Carson's eyes on her back. Once safely away from the ranch, she urged her borrowed horse into a gallop, eager to share what she'd learned with Nathan. But trouble found her first. As she crossed a dry wash, 3 riders appeared, blocking her path. She recognized them as Carson's men from the town meeting. "Afternoon, miss," the leader drawled. "Bit far from the schoolhouse, aren't you?" Elizabeth's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "I had business with Mr. Carson." "Funny thing, boss didn't mention expecting you." The man edged his horse closer. "Maybe you should come back with us, clear up any confusion." Elizabeth glanced around, calculating escape routes. The wash provided some cover, but these men knew the terrain far better than she did. "That won't be necessary," she began, but the leader cut her off. "I insist." His hand dropped to his gun belt. Before Elizabeth could respond, a rifle shot cracked through the air. The bullet kicked up dust inches from the leader's horse, causing it to rear. "The lady said it's not necessary." Nathan's voice came from the ridge above. He sat astride his paint horse, rifle aimed steadily at the group. "Now move along." The 3 men hesitated, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the leader spat in the dust. "This ain't over, Blackwood. It is for today." After they rode off, Nathan descended to the wash. His face was tight with controlled anger. "What were you thinking, going to Carson's alone?" "I was gathering information," Elizabeth replied, her own fear giving way to indignation. "And I found it. The railroad deal closes in 3 days. After that, Carson will own half the valley." Nathan's anger faded, replaced by urgency. 3 days? We need to act now." That evening, they gathered their evidence. The assay reports, Elizabeth's observations, the pattern of attacks. It painted a damning picture, but as Sheriff Rawlins had warned, it wasn't legal proof. "We need something concrete," Nathan said, pacing the cottage floor. "A witness, a document, something that directly links Carson to Henry's murder." Elizabeth studied their map, thinking, what about Henry's ranch hands? Someone must have seen something. Most scattered after the murder, too scared to stay. But where would they go? Elizabeth pressed. "Men with families can't just disappear." Nathan stopped pacing. "The reservation. Some had Apache wives. They might have sought shelter with their families." "Can we find them?" Nathan's expression turned thoughtful. "My mother's people might know, but approaching the reservation isn't simple. There's a lot of mistrust. Will they talk to you?" "Maybe, if I go alone." He hesitated. "It's dangerous. The army doesn't like unauthorized visitors to the reservation." Elizabeth met his eyes. "We're running out of time." Nathan nodded slowly. "I'll leave at first light. Can you manage here alone?" "I'll be fine. Sarah's here and Jake can handle the ranch work." But Nathan still looked concerned. "Carson knows you were snooping today. He might try something." "Then I'll be ready." Elizabeth moved to her trunk and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. Unwrapping it revealed a small derringer. "My father's. He insisted I bring it west." Nathan's eyebrows rose. "Do you know how to use it?" "Well enough." She rewrapped the gun. "Go to the reservation. Find those witnesses. I'll hold things together here." That night, unable to sleep, Elizabeth sat on her porch watching the stars. The desert sky seemed impossibly vast, filled with more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled, the sound lonely and wild. She thought about the strange path that had brought her here. A month ago, she'd been planning her wedding to a man she'd never met. Now that man was dead, and she was embroiled in a fight against the very forces that had killed him. More surprisingly, she found herself caring deeply about this harsh land and its people, especially one person. Nathan had become more than just an ally. His quiet strength, his integrity, the way he moved between worlds with dignity, all had awakened feelings she hadn't expected to find again. But this was hardly the time for such thoughts. They had a murder to solve, a corrupt rancher to stop, and only 3 days to do it. A sound from the darkness made her tense. Footsteps approached the cottage. "Elizabeth," Sarah's voice called softly. "Are you awake?" Relief flooded through her. On the porch, Sarah climbed the steps, wrapping her shawl tighter against the night chill. "I saw your lamp. Couldn't sleep either?" "Too much on my mind." Sarah settled into the other chair. "Nathan told me he's going to the reservation. You're worried, aren't you?" "Always." Sarah smiled sadly. "But he knows what he's doing. The Apache blood in him. It's not just about appearance. He understands things, sees things that others miss." Elizabeth nodded, remembering how naturally Nathan moved through the landscape, how he could read signs in the earth that were invisible. To her, "Can I ask you something?" Sarah continued. "Why are you really doing this? You could have taken Carson's offer, lived comfortably, avoided all this danger." Elizabeth considered the question. At first it was just survival. Then it became about justice for Henry. But now, she gestured at the star-filled sky, the vast land stretching unseen in the darkness. Now it's about protecting something worth saving. This valley, these people, this way of life, Carson would destroy it all for profit. "And Nathan?" Sarah asked softly. "Is he worth saving too?" Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the darkness. "We're just working together to stop Carson." Sarah's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled. "Of course, just be careful, Elizabeth. The heart doesn't always wait for convenient timing." After Sarah left, Elizabeth remained on the porch, watching the eastern sky begin to lighten. Somewhere out there, Nathan was riding toward the reservation, seeking answers that might save them all, or doom them if he failed. She touched the derringer in her pocket, its weight both reassuring and ominous. 3 days to stop Carson. 3 days to find justice for Henry. 3 days to save a valley, and perhaps discover if the unexpected feelings growing in her heart had any chance of surviving in this beautiful, dangerous land. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. A new day had begun, bringing them one step closer to either triumph or disaster. The desert morning carried an unusual chill as Nathan Blackwood rode south toward the San Carlos reservation. His paint horse, whom he called Nightshade after a famous Apache warrior, moved steadily through the rugged terrain. Nathan had packed light, bedroll, canteen, rifle, and the small medicine bundle his mother had given him years ago. The reservation lay 30 miles from Silver Creek, officially off limits to civilians without military permission. But Nathan knew the hidden trails, paths his mother's people had used for generations before being confined to the reservation boundaries. As he rode, memories surfaced unbidden. His mother, Mourning Dove, teaching him to track deer through these very canyons. His father, Thomas Blackwood, insisting he learn both Apache and white ways. The delicate balance he'd walked his entire life, never fully belonging to either world. By midday, he reached Eagle Pass, a narrow canyon that served as an unofficial entrance to reservation land. Here, he dismounted, removing his hat and gun. He belted gestures of respect and peaceful intent. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a red cloth and tied it to a branch where it would be visible. Then he waited. An hour passed before a figure materialized from the rocks above. Nathan recognized his cousin, John Manyhorse, one of the tribal police. "You shouldn't be here, cousin," John called down in Apache. "I seek information," Nathan replied in the same language, "about the murdered white rancher." John descended carefully, his expression wary. "The army's been watching the boundaries closely. They suspect Apache involvement. We both know our people had nothing to do with Henry Morton's death." John studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Follow me, but if we encounter soldiers, you're on your own." They traveled deeper into the reservation, avoiding main trails. The landscape grew more severe, red rock formations rising like ancient sentinels, sparse vegetation clinging to life in the arid soil. This was homeland to the Apache, a place most whites saw as wasteland, but which held profound meaning for those who understood its secrets. At sunset, they reached a cluster of wickiups near a small spring. An elderly woman emerged from the largest dwelling, her face creased with age but her eyes sharp. Nathan's heart quickened. Grandmother Sage, his mother's aunt, spiritual leader of this small band. "So the half-blood returns," she said, her voice carrying neither welcome nor rejection. Nathan bowed respectfully. "Grandmother, I seek your wisdom." She gestured for him to sit by the fire. Others gathered, faces he recognized from childhood. Relatives who had chosen reservation life over the uncertain existence of those who lived among whites. "Speak your purpose," Grandmother Sage commanded. Nathan explained about Henry Morton's murder, the pattern of attacks, Carson's schemes. The gathered Apache listened without interruption, their expressions revealing nothing. When he finished, Grandmother Sage nodded slowly. "The white ranchers' men. Some came here with their wives' families. They spoke of strange things before the killing." A younger man stepped forward. "I am Joseph Two Eagles. My sister married one of Morton's cowboys, Tom Reynolds. They arrived 3 weeks ago, frightened. Where are they now?" Nathan asked. "Gone deeper into the reservation. But Tom told me something before they left." Joseph's expression darkened. "The day before Morton died, Tom saw riders on the property, white men, but not ranch hands. They were surveying, taking measurements." "Did he recognize them?" "One, yes. Carson's foreman, Bill Tanner. Tom heard them talking about silver, about how the old man would never sell." Nathan's pulse quickened. This was the witness they needed. "Will Tom testify to this?" Joseph shook his head. "He fears for his family. Carson's men threatened to kill his children if he spoke." "We can protect them," Nathan insisted. Grandmother Sage raised a weathered hand. "Protection from men who murder for land. Who is this we you speak of?" Nathan hesitated, then spoke from his heart. "The Apache have lost too much already. If Carson succeeds, he'll control the water rights for the entire valley. The reservation depends on that water too. This fight isn't just about one murdered rancher or one Eastern woman's justice. It's about stopping a man who would destroy everything for profit." The old woman studied him intently. "You speak of the white woman who was to marry Morton. Why? Do you care what happens to her?" The question struck deeper than Nathan expected. Images of Elizabeth flashed through his mind, her strength in the face of loss, her quick intelligence, the way she stood tall despite her circumstances. "She seeks justice, not revenge," he said finally. "She could have taken Carson's money, lived comfortably. Instead, she chose to fight for what's right." Grandmother Sage's knowing smile suggested she heard more than his words conveyed. "Love makes warriors of us all," she said softly. Then, louder, "Joseph, bring Tom Reynolds to speak with your cousin. But remember," she fixed Nathan with a stern gaze, "if harm comes to our people because of this, the responsibility is yours." Nathan spent the night in the Apache camp, sharing food and stories around the fire. It felt both familiar and foreign, the language of his childhood on his tongue, yet the awareness that his life had moved beyond these boundaries. Tom Reynolds arrived near midnight, a lean man with sun-weathered features and nervous eyes. His Apache wife, Mary, stood beside him holding their infant son. "I can't go back there," Tom said immediately. "Carson's men will kill us all." "Not if we act quickly," Nathan assured him. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Tom's account was detailed and damning. He'd been checking fence lines when he spotted Carson's foreman with two other men. They carried surveying equipment and maps, clearly searching for something specific. "I heard Tanner say they'd found the richest vein yet, right under Morton's South pasture. Said the old man was sitting on a fortune and didn't even know it." "Did they see you?" Tom shuddered. "No, but next day, after Mr. Morton was killed, Tanner cornered me in town, said he knew I'd been out by the South pasture, told me if I valued my family, I'd forget what I saw and leave the territory." "Will you testify to this in court?" Tom looked at his wife and child. "If you can guarantee their safety," Nathan considered carefully. "Bring your family to the Double B. We'll protect them until after the trial. Once Carson's in prison, you'll be safe." Mary spoke for the first time. "You promise this on your honor as both Apache and white?" The dual nature of the oath carried weight. Nathan nodded solemnly. "On my honor in both worlds." Dawn found Nathan riding hard for the Double B, Tom and his family following on borrowed horses. They'd left the reservation under cover of darkness, using trails known only to the Apache, but as they neared the ranch, Nathan sensed something wrong. Smoke rose from the direction of his property. Spurring Nitya to greater speed, Nathan crested the final ridge and saw devastation below. The main barn was engulfed in flames, horses running free in panic. Ranch hands battled the blaze with buckets, but it was clearly a losing fight. Nathan's first thought was for Elizabeth. Racing to her cottage, he found it untouched but empty. Sarah Mills ran toward him, her face streaked with soot. "Nathan, thank God you're back. Where's Elizabeth?" "At the main house, organizing the firefighting. She's been amazing. Saved most of the horses herself." Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by rage. This was Carson's work, a clear message. He found Elizabeth directing ranch hands with calm authority, her dress ruined by smoke and ash, but her spine straight as ever. When she saw him, something flickered in her eyes, relief, concern, and something deeper. "Carson's men?" he asked without preamble. She nodded grimly. "3 riders just after midnight. Jake tried to stop them, but—" She gestured to where the foreman sat, nursing a head wound. "I brought witnesses," Nathan said quietly. "Tom Reynolds saw Carson's men surveying Henry's land the day before the murder." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "That's what we need. Where are they?" "Coming behind me." "But Carson's getting desperate. This attack proves it." They spent the morning salvaging what they could from the burned barn. Tom and his family arrived safely, though clearly shaken by the destruction. Elizabeth immediately took charge of settling them in the main house, her natural authority putting the frightened family at ease. That afternoon, Sheriff Rawlins arrived, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "Got reports of riders heading toward Carson's place after the fire. No proof, of course. We have proof of something better," Nathan told him, explaining about Tom's testimony. The sheriff's weathered face showed the first real hope Nathan had. "Seen. If Reynolds will swear to this in court, we might finally have Carson." But their optimism was short-lived. As they discussed legal strategy, a rider approached at full gallop, one of Nathan's hands from the north pasture. "Boss, they've dammed the creek. Carson's men, they're diverting all the water to his property." Nathan swore violently. Without water, his cattle would die within days. Carson wasn't just sending a message now, he was trying to destroy the Double B entirely. He's forcing our hand, Elizabeth said, her mind clearly working. "The railroad investors arrive tomorrow. If he can eliminate you as competition before then nothing stands between him and total control, Nathan finished. Sheriff Rawlins looked uncomfortable. I can't arrest Carson for the dam without proof his men built it, and by the time we get an injunction, my cattle will be dead, Nathan said flatly. Elizabeth stepped forward, her eyes blazing. Then we don't wait for legal remedies. We take that dam apart ourselves. The sheriff raised his hands. Now hold on. That's destruction of property. I can't condone. You don't have to, Elizabeth interrupted. You weren't here for this conversation. You didn't hear anything about our plans. Sheriff Rawlins studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Reckon I should be getting back to town. Lots of paperwork about that barn fire. He mounted his horse, then paused. Whatever you're not planning to do, be careful. Carson's men will be watching that dam. As the sheriff rode away, Nathan turned to Elizabeth. You don't have to be part of this. It's dangerous, probably illegal. Her chin lifted in that way he'd come to admire. Henry Morton was murdered for that land. You've lost a barn, and now your water. At what point do we stop letting Carson dictate terms? Nathan felt something shift in his chest, admiration deepening into something more profound. This woman, who'd arrived seeking a simple life as a rancher's wife, had become a warrior for justice. Tonight, then, he decided, we'll need tools, weapons, and every man willing to ride with us. Elizabeth nodded. I'll organize supplies. Tom Reynolds should stay here with his family. We need him alive to testify. As the sun set, a group assembled. At the Double B, Nathan's most trusted hands, Jake Sullivan despite his injury, and to Nathan's surprise, several men from neighboring ranches. Carson's pushed too far, one explained. Today it's your water. Tomorrow it could be ours. Elizabeth emerged from the house wearing borrowed trousers and a dark shirt, her hair bound back, the derringer visible in her belt. Nathan's protest died on his lips at her determined expression. Try to stop me and I'll follow anyway, she said quietly. This is my fight too. Under cover of darkness they rode toward the creek. The dam was crude but effective. Logs and rocks piled to divert water into a hastily dug channel leading to Carson's property. 2 guards patrolled nearby, rifles visible in the moonlight. Nathan signaled for silence, then outlined his plan with hand gestures. They'd split into 2 groups, one to distract the guards, the other to dismantle the dam. What followed was tense, dangerous work. Jake's group created a diversion by driving a small herd of cattle toward the guards' position. While the guards investigated, Nathan's team attacked the dam with picks and pry bars. Elizabeth worked alongside the men, her determination making up for her lack of experience. When one guard returned unexpectedly, she showed no hesitation in leveling her derringer at him. "Drop the rifle," she commanded, her voice steady. The man complied, clearly shocked to face an armed woman in trousers. Nathan quickly bound him while work continued on the dam. Just as the first logs began to shift, releasing a trickle of water, shots rang out. Carson's reinforcements had arrived. "Take cover!" Nathan shouted, pulling Elizabeth behind a boulder. As bullets whined overhead, the next minutes were chaos. Gunfire, shouts, the crash of logs as the dam began to collapse. Nathan returned fire, trying to pin down their attackers while his men completed their work. Suddenly, Elizabeth cried out. Nathan turned to see her wrestling with a man who'd circled behind them. Without thinking, he launched himself at the attacker, years of Apache training, making his movements swift and lethal. The man fell, unconscious but alive. Elizabeth stood shaking, her derringer still clutched in her hand. "Are you hurt?" Nathan demanded, checking her for injuries. "No, I'm fine." But her voice trembled. A tremendous crack echoed through the canyon as the dam gave way completely. Water rushed back into its natural channel, the sound drowning out the gunfire. Carson's men, realizing they'd lost, retreated into the darkness. As dawn broke, Nathan surveyed their victory. The creek flowed freely again, his cattle would survive, and they'd struck a significant blow against Carson's plans. But the real battle still lay ahead. Tomorrow, the railroad investors would arrive, and Carson would be more dangerous than ever. They had one day to gather their evidence, secure Tom's testimony, and present their case to authorities who might finally listen. Elizabeth stood beside him, watching the sun rise over the valley. Her clothes were torn, her face smudged with dirt, but Nathan had never seen anyone more beautiful. "We did it," she said softly. "The first round," he agreed. "Tomorrow determines everything." She turned to face him fully. "Whatever happens, I want you to know. I'm glad I stayed, glad I found my way to the Double B." Nathan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "So am I." For a moment, the rest of the world fell away. Carson, the railroad, the danger that surrounded them. There was only this woman who'd brought light to his solitary existence, who stood tall in every sense of the word. Then reality intruded as Jake approached with news of injuries to tend and damage to assess. The moment passed, but its promise lingered. Tomorrow would bring either justice or ruin. But today they'd proven that Carson could be fought, that right could prevail over might. The water flowed free, the sun rose bright, and hope remained alive. In the valley, the morning of the railroad investors' arrival dawned clear and tense. Silver Creek buzzed with anticipation. Bunting hung across Main Street, the saloon offered free drinks, and Carson's men were conspicuously absent, no doubt preparing their boss's grand presentation. At the Double B, Elizabeth helped Tom Reynolds prepare his testimony. The former ranch hand was nervous but resolute, especially after witnessing the previous night's battle at the creek. "You just tell them exactly what you told me," Elizabeth encouraged. "The truth is powerful enough." Nathan entered the room, dressed in his finest suit, a rare sight that made Elizabeth's breath catch. "The investors' train arrives at noon. Sheriff Rawlins has arranged for us to present our evidence at the town hall immediately after Carson's. In presentation, will they listen?" Tom asked anxiously. "They'll have to," Nathan replied. "These aren't local officials Carson can intimidate. They're Eastern businessmen who care about their investment's legitimacy." Elizabeth stood, smoothing her own carefully chosen outfit, a dignified grey dress that projected both authority and respectability. "Then let's make sure they understand exactly who they're dealing with." The train arrived precisely at noon, a gleaming marvel of modern engineering that seemed almost alien in the frontier setting. 3 Pullman cars discharged a group of well-dressed men who looked equally out of place, Eastern investors with soft hands and sharp eyes. Carson greeted them like visiting royalty, his silver hair gleaming, his manner oozing charm. Elizabeth watched from the crowd as he led them to waiting carriages, no doubt heading to his ranch for a carefully orchestrated display of prosperity. "He's going to show them the valley from his property," Nathan murmured beside her. "Make it seem like he already controls everything. Then we'll show them the truth," Elizabeth replied. The town hall filled quickly that afternoon. Carson's presentation was masterful. Maps, charts, projected profits, all painting a picture of inevitable progress with himself as the essential catalyst. "Gentlemen," he concluded, "the future of this valley lies in consolidated ownership. Individual ranchers lack the capital and vision for proper development. Through my company, you'll see returns that will make your Western investment the envy of Wall Street." Polite applause followed. Then Sheriff Rawlins stood. "Before any decisions are made, there's another perspective to consider." Carson's smile tightened. "Sheriff, this is a business meeting, not a town forum." "It's about the legitimacy of your business," Nathan interjected, rising from his seat. "Gentlemen, I'm Nathan Blackwood, owner of the Double B Ranch. What Mr. Carson hasn't told you is how he's acquired his land holdings." A murmur rippled through the investors. Carson's face darkened. "This is highly irregular. Murder is irregular, Elizabeth said clearly, standing beside Nathan. Gentlemen, I came to this valley to marry Henry Morton, a rancher who refused to sell to Mr. Carson. I arrived to find him murdered, shot in the back 3 days before my arrival. The lead investor, a distinguished man with silver sideburns, leaned forward. These are serious accusations, madam. We have proof, Nathan declared. He nodded to Tom Reynolds, who rose shakily. For the next 20 minutes, Tom detailed what he'd witnessed. Carson's men surveying Henry's land, discussions of silver deposits, the threats made after the murder. His testimony was halting but compelling, the ring of truth evident in every word. Carson attempted to interrupt several times, but the investors waved him to silence, clearly intrigued by this unexpected drama. When Tom finished, Elizabeth presented the assay reports she'd discovered. These prove Carson knew about the silver deposits before Henry Morton's death, combined with the pattern of attacks on other ranchers. Enough, Carson exploded. This is character assassination. These people are desperate competitors trying to undermine legitimate business. The lead investor raised a hand. Mr. Carson, these allegations are troubling. If there's even a possibility of criminal activity, there's no proof, Carson insisted. Just stories and coincidences. There's more, Nathan said quietly. He produced a leather folder. Last night, Mr. Carson's men burned my barn and attempted to divert the creek that provides water to my ranch. We have witnesses. The investors exchanged glances. This was clearly not the smooth presentation they'd expected. Carson's composure cracked. You're going to believe these people? A half-breed and a desperate spinster? Against my word. The racial slur echoed in the sudden silence. Elizabeth saw Nathan's jaw tighten, but he maintained his dignity. The lead investor stood. Mr. Carson, we came here to evaluate a business opportunity, not to become entangled in what appears to be a criminal enterprise. Until these matters are resolved legally, we cannot proceed with any investment. Chaos erupted. Carson's face went from red to purple as he realized his grand plan was crumbling. His men, stationed around the room, shifted restlessly. You're making a mistake, Carson snarled. I own this valley. No, Elizabeth said firmly. You've stolen from it. There's a difference. What happened next occurred with shocking speed. Carson pulled a gun from his coat, aiming at Nathan. Elizabeth reacted instinctively, shoving Nathan aside as the shot rang out. Pain exploded in her shoulder. She heard screaming, saw Nathan's face contort in rage and fear, felt herself falling. Then strong arms caught her, and Nathan's voice was in her. You're desperate and tender. Elizabeth, stay with me! More gunshots echoed as Carson's men and the sheriff's deputies exchanged fire. Through a haze of pain, Elizabeth saw Carson trying to escape, only to be tackled by Jake Sullivan. Got the bastard! Jake shouted triumphantly. The room spun. Elizabeth focused on Nathan's face above her, saw tears in his eyes, this strong, stoic man crying for her. I'm all right, she managed. Just my shoulder. You saved my life, he whispered. You foolish, brave woman. Despite the pain, Elizabeth smiled. Someone had to protect you for a change. Dr. Hawthorne arrived, efficiently examining her wound. Clean through the shoulder. She's lucky. As the doctor worked, Elizabeth watched the aftermath unfold. Carson sat in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. The investors huddled with Sheriff Rawlins, no doubt providing statements. Tom Reynolds held his wife and child, finally free from fear. It's over, she murmured. Thanks to you, Nathan replied, never leaving her side. The next hours passed in a blur of laudanum and activity. Elizabeth found herself in bed at the Double B, her shoulder bandaged, surrounded by concerned faces. Sarah fussed over her like a mother hen, while Nathan maintained a vigil in the corner, his expression haunted. Sheriff Rawlins visited that evening with news. Carson's confessed to ordering Henry's murder. Seems facing federal charges for attempted murder of witnesses. Loosened his tongue. He's implicated 6 of his men in various crimes. What about the railroad? Elizabeth asked. The investors are reconsidering their entire approach. They're talking about working with the existing ranches instead of replacing them. The sheriff smiled. Seems they were impressed by the community's courage. After he left, Nathan finally approached her bedside. You should rest. I've been resting all day, Elizabeth protested. Sit with me. He pulled a chair close, taking her uninjured hand in his. For a long moment neither spoke. When I saw that gun pointed at you, Elizabeth finally said, I didn't think. I just acted. You could have been killed. So could you. She squeezed his hand. I've lost one man to violence in this valley. I couldn't bear to lose another. Nathan's eyes searched hers. Another? Elizabeth felt heat rise to her cheeks, but didn't look away. You must know how I feel about you. I hoped, he admitted, but you came here for Henry, for a different life entirely. I came here for a new beginning, she corrected. I found something far more precious than I ever imagined. Nathan lifted her hand to his lips, his kiss gentle against her skin. Elizabeth. Goldwell, you've turned my world upside down since the moment you refused to board that stage back to Boston. Is that a complaint? It's a miracle. His voice roughened with emotion. I built walls around my heart, convinced myself I'd always be alone. Then you arrived, strong, brave, seeing me for who I am, not what I am. Tears pricked Elizabeth's eyes. And what are you, Nathan Blackwood? A man completely in love with you. The words hung in the air, profound and perfect. Elizabeth reached up with her good arm, drawing him down until their lips met in a kiss that tasted of promises and new beginnings. When they parted, Nathan's smile held wonder. Stay, he whispered. Not just in Silver Creek, not just at the Double B. Stay with me always. Yes, Elizabeth replied simply. Always. News of Carson's arrest spread quickly, changing the valley's atmosphere overnight. Ranchers who'd lived in fear began planning for the future. The railroad investors, chastened by their near association with a criminal, proposed a cooperative arrangement that would benefit all landowners. A week later, as Elizabeth's shoulder healed, an unexpected visitor arrived at the Double B. A woman in expensive mourning clothes stepped from a hired carriage, her face drawn with grief and determination. I'm Margaret Morton, she announced, Henry's sister. Elizabeth received her in the parlor, uncertain what to expect. Margaret was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 40, with Henry's kind eyes, but a harder edge to her features. I came as soon as I received word, Margaret explained, first about Henry's death, then about everything else. She studied Elizabeth intently. You're the woman who was to marry my brother? Yes, I'm so sorry for your loss. Margaret nodded, then surprised Elizabeth by taking her hands. Sheriff Rawlins told me everything. How you sought justice for Henry, how you were wounded, stopping his killer. Tears filled her eyes. Thank you. They talked for hours. Margaret shared stories of Henry's childhood, his dreams for the ranch, his loneliness after their parents died. Elizabeth found herself grieving anew for the man she'd never truly known but had helped avenge. I've decided to sell the ranch, Margaret finally said. I have no desire to live here, and the memories... She paused. I want you to have first option to buy it. Elizabeth blinked in surprise. Me? But I couldn't possibly afford... Henry mentioned you in his last letter? Margaret interrupted. He said he'd found someone special, someone who understood his vision for this land. I think he'd want you to have it. Later, discussing the offer with Nathan, Elizabeth felt overwhelmed. It's too much, the price, the responsibility. We could manage it together, Nathan said carefully. Combine the properties, run them as one operation. The implication wasn't lost on Elizabeth. "Is that a business proposal, Mr. Blackwood?" Nathan smiled, reaching into his pocket. "Actually, I had something more personal in mind." He opened a small box, revealing a ring set with a single turquoise stone. "It was my mother's. Apache tradition says turquoise brings happiness and good fortune." Elizabeth's breath caught. "Nathan." He knelt beside her chair, his expression tender. "Elizabeth Caldwell, you came west seeking one future and found another. Would you do me the honor of building that future together, as my wife, my partner in all things?" Joy flooded through her. "Yes," she laughed through tears. "Yes to all of it." Their kiss was interrupted by cheering from the doorway, where Sarah, Jake, and half the ranch hands had apparently been eavesdropping. "About time," Jake called out. "We've been waiting weeks for you two to figure it out." The wedding took place a month later in Silver Creek's small church. Elizabeth wore a simple, white dress of her own creation, her bouquet filled with desert wildflowers. Nathan stood tall and proud in a suit that somehow made him look even more handsome than usual. The entire town attended, even some Apache relatives from the reservation. Grandmother Sage herself blessed the union with ancient words that needed no translation. As they exchanged vows, Elizabeth marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She traveled west as a mail-order bride for one man, only to find her true destiny with another. The tragedy that had greeted her arrival had led to triumph, justice, and a love deeper than she'd ever imagined. "You may kiss your bride, Reverend," Thompson announced. Nathan's kiss was tender, full of promise. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Elizabeth saw not just acceptance in the faces before them, but genuine joy. She had found her place, her purpose, her home. The reception filled the town hall with music and laughter. Elizabeth danced with her new husband, no longer feeling out of place or unwanted. The shadow of Carson's reign had lifted, replaced by open community spirit. "Happy?" Nathan whispered as they swayed to a frontier fiddle. "Beyond words," Elizabeth replied, and she was. The woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach months ago, uncertain, grieving, alone, had been transformed. Not by the West itself, but by the courage she'd found within herself and the love she'd discovered in the most unexpected place. As the sun set over Silver Creek, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Elizabeth Blackwood looked toward the future with joy. She had found more than a new beginning. She had found herself, and in doing so, had helped reshape an entire community's destiny. The mail-order bride who'd arrived to find her groom dead had become something far greater. A force for justice, a voice for the voiceless, and the wife of a man who saw her not as she appeared to the world, but as she truly was, strong, capable, and extraordinary. In the vast, challenging landscape of the Arizona Territory, Elizabeth had finally found where she belonged. 6 months into their marriage, Elizabeth and Nathan had transformed both the Double B and Henry Morton's former ranch into a thriving operation. The combined lands, now called Sunrise Valley Ranch, stretched across prime grazing territory with abundant water rights, exactly what Carson had killed for. But success brought new challenges. As Elizabeth worked on the account books one spring morning, a telegram arrived that would shake their newfound peace. Mrs. Blackwood, the telegraph operator's boy, stood nervously at the door. "Urgent message from Boston." Elizabeth's heart stuttered. She hadn't received word from back east since leaving. With trembling fingers, she opened the telegram. "Father deceased. Stop substantial debts. Stop creditors seeking payment. Stop your presence required. Stop Bancroft and Sons attorneys." Nathan found her sitting motionless at the desk, the telegram crumpled in her hand. "What's wrong?" "My father died," she said numbly. "He left debts, significant ones apparently." Nathan knelt beside her chair. "I'm sorry about your father. How bad are the debts?" "I don't know." But father was proud, always lived beyond our means after mother died. If attorneys are involved, she pressed her fingers to her temples. I have to go back. We'll go back, Nathan corrected firmly. Elizabeth looked at him in surprise. But the ranch, the spring carving. Jake can manage for a few weeks. You're not facing this alone. 3 days later, they boarded an eastbound train. The journey that had taken Elizabeth weeks in the opposite direction now passed in a blur of steam and steel. Nathan, who'd never traveled east of Kansas, watched the changing landscape with quiet interest. Nervous? Elizabeth asked as they approached Boston. About meeting your city? No. About meeting people who knew you before? Perhaps. She squeezed his hand. They'll love you. But Boston society proved less welcoming than Elizabeth hoped. Their hotel clerk's eyes widened at Nathan's appearance, and whispers followed them through the lobby. Elizabeth had forgotten how rigid Eastern social boundaries could be. At the law offices of Bancroft and Sons, they learned the full extent of the disaster. Mr. Bancroft, elderly and sympathetic, laid out the grim facts. Your father invested heavily in shipping ventures that failed. He borrowed against everything, the house, his business interests, even your mother's jewelry. The lawyer adjusted his spectacles. The total debt exceeds $30,000. Elizabeth felt the blood drain from her face. It was a fortune, more than the ranch earned in 5 years. There must be assets to offset this, Nathan said. Very few, I'm afraid. The house is already in foreclosure. The only substantial asset is... Bancroft hesitated. Well, there's your mother's family trust. What trust? Elizabeth asked, confused. Your maternal grandfather established it for you. It becomes accessible upon your marriage or 30th birthday. Your father tried repeatedly to break the trust, but couldn't. How much? Nathan asked. Approximately $40,000. Relief flooded through Elizabeth until Bancroft continued. However, there's a complication. The trust has specific conditions. It can only be claimed if you're married to someone of appropriate social standing. The words hung in the air like poison. Define appropriate, Nathan said quietly. Bancroft looked uncomfortable. The trust was written in 1840. The language is archaic. It specifies someone of European descent, Christian faith, and established family background. Elizabeth's anger flared. My husband is Christian. His father was from an established Boston family. Yes, but... Bancroft couldn't meet Nathan's eyes. Your grandfather was quite specific about racial purity. I'm afraid the trustees would challenge any claim based on your current marriage. Nathan stood abruptly. We've heard enough. Thank you for your time. Outside, Elizabeth trembled with rage and shame. I'm so sorry. I had no idea about any of this. It's not your fault, Nathan said, but she could see the hurt in his eyes. We'll find another way to pay the debts. With what? Even selling my share of the ranch wouldn't cover half. They walked in troubled silence until a voice called out, Elizabeth, Elizabeth Caldwell. A well-dressed man approached, his face lighting with recognition. Charles Worthington, her former fiancé who died in the war, or so she'd been told. Charles. Elizabeth stared in shock. But we were told you died at Gettysburg. Wounded, not killed. Captured, actually. He smiled warmly, then noticed Nathan. His expression shifted subtly. I returned to find you'd gone west. Awkward introductions followed. Charles was everything Boston society approved of. Wealthy, refined, properly pedigreed. Next to Nathan's quiet strength, he seemed almost insubstantial. I heard about your father, Charles said. Terrible business. If there's anything I can do... An idea formed in Elizabeth's mind, desperate, perhaps unethical, but potentially their only solution. Actually, she said carefully, we're dealing with some legal complications regarding my mother's trust. Perhaps you could advise us?" Over dinner, at Charles's insistence, the situation became clearer. Charles, now a successful banker, understood immediately. "The trust provisions are archaic, but legally binding," he confirmed. "Unless—" He hesitated, glancing between Elizabeth and Nathan. "There might be a way." "What way?" Nathan asked. "If Elizabeth were to temporarily adjust her marital status, claim the trust, then remarry, the money would already be distributed." The suggestion landed like a bomb. Elizabeth felt Nathan stiffen beside her. "You mean an annulment," she said flatly. "On paper only." Charles rushed to explain. "A legal maneuver. Many couples do it for inheritance purposes." "No," Nathan said firmly. But that night in their hotel room, Elizabeth couldn't let it go. "It would solve everything," she argued. "A few signatures, we claim the trust, then remarry immediately." "No," Nathan repeated. "I won't pretend our marriage doesn't exist, not for any amount of money. But the ranch will find another way." His eyes blazed. "I didn't marry you for convenience or money. I won't unmake those vows for the same reasons." Elizabeth felt tears threaten. "I'm trying to fix this, not at the cost of our integrity." Nathan softened, pulling her close. "We'll face whatever comes, together." But fate wasn't finished testing them. The next morning brought another telegram, this one from Silver Creek. "Carson escaped prison. Stop threatening witnesses. Stop ranch under guard. Stop advise immediate return. Stop Sheriff Rawlins." Nathan cursed. "We need to go back, now. But the debts can wait. Carson won't." Charles appeared at the train station as they prepared to leave. "I heard about Carson," he said. "Elizabeth, please reconsider my offer. I could handle everything here while you deal with the crisis at home." Nathan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Elizabeth looked between the two men, one offering an easy solution, the other standing firm on principle. In that moment, she understood what truly mattered. "Thank you, Charles. But no." She took Nathan's arm. "My husband and I will handle our problems together." The train journey west felt endless. Nathan strategized with grim determination, while Elizabeth worried about their friends and employees. Carson's escape changed everything. Their hard-won peace was shattered. They arrived in Silver Creek to find the town on edge. Armed men patrolled the streets, and Sheriff Rawlins looked exhausted. "Carson broke out during a prison transfer," he explained. "Killed 2 guards. He's got supporters hiding him, and he's sworn vengeance on everyone who testified against him." At the ranch, they found Jake Sullivan organizing defenses. The house had become a fortress, with shuttered windows and armed guards. "Tom Reynolds and his family are here," Jake reported. "Figure they're safer with us than anywhere else. Sarah's keeping the women calm." Nathan surveyed the preparations with approval. "Good work. Any sign of Carson?" "Not yet, but his men have been spotted. In the hills, they're planning something." That night, Elizabeth lay awake beside Nathan, listening to the guard's footsteps on the porch. The twin threats of Carson's revenge and the crushing debt seemed insurmountable. "I was wrong," she whispered in the darkness. "About what?" "Refusing Charles's offer. We could have secured the money, saved the ranch." Nathan turned to face her. "And lost something more valuable. Elizabeth, when I married you, I made promises before God and man. Those aren't negotiable. Even if it costs us everything, we haven't lost anything that matters." "Not yet." A shout from outside interrupted them. Gunfire erupted, shattering the night's peace. Nathan grabbed his rifle and ran for the door, Elizabeth close behind with her derringer. The attack came from 3 sides, riders firing from the darkness, while others attempted to set fire to the outbuildings. Nathan coordinated the defense. With military precision, his Apache training evident in every command, Elizabeth found herself at an upstairs window, firing at shadows, praying each shot would miss its mark, even as she aimed true. Below, she saw Jake wrestling with an attacker who'd breached the perimeter. The battle lasted less than an hour, but felt eternal. When silence finally fell, 3 attackers lay dead. Several others had fled, and miraculously, none of the defenders were seriously hurt. "Carson?" Elizabeth asked as Nathan checked each fallen man. "Not here. These were hired guns." He looked up at the hills. "He's watching, though, testing our defenses." Dawn brought reinforcements. Neighboring ranchers who'd heard the gunfire. The community that had once cowered before Carson now stood united against him. "We'll take shifts patrolling," declared Bill Masters from the Circle J Ranch. Nobody faces this alone. As the men organized expanded defenses, an unexpected visitor arrived. Margaret Morton, Henry's sister, drove up in a dusty carriage. "I heard what happened," she said without preamble. "About Carson, about your troubles in Boston." She handed Elizabeth a bank draft. "This is from Henry's estate. I was going to invest it, but you need it more." Elizabeth stared at the amount. $15,000, half their debt. "Margaret, I can't." "You can and you will. Henry would have wanted this." Margaret's eyes softened. "You brought his killer to justice. Let him help protect what you've built." Overwhelmed, Elizabeth embraced her. "Thank you." But even this gift only solved half their problem. As Elizabeth updated their accounts that evening, she faced hard truths. They could pay some creditors, negotiate with others, but without the full amount, they'd likely lose the ranch anyway. Nathan found her surrounded by ledgers, tears of frustration on her cheeks. "We'll make it work," he said. "How?" "Even with Margaret's gift, we're still short, and with Carson out there, we can't even run the ranch properly." A knock interrupted them. Sarah entered, looking troubled. "There's something you should know. Charles Worthington is in town. He's staying at the hotel." Elizabeth's heart sank. "Charles, here. He's been asking questions about the ranch, about your situation." Sarah hesitated. "And he's been meeting with the banker." Nathan's expression darkened. "He followed us. Or he's here to help," Elizabeth suggested, though doubt colored her voice. The next morning provided answers. Charles appeared at the ranch, immaculately dressed despite the dust, carrying a leather portfolio. "I've taken the liberty of negotiating with your creditors," he announced. "They've agreed to a settlement, $20,000 paid within 30 days. "That's still more than we have," Elizabeth pointed out. "Which brings me to my proposal." Charles opened his portfolio. "I'll loan you the difference, interest-free. My bank will hold a lien on the ranch as security." Nathan's eyes narrowed. "And what do you want in return?" Charles smiled. "Nothing untoward. Simply the satisfaction of helping an old friend." His gaze lingered on Elizabeth. "Though I admit, I hope to renew our acquaintance." The offer was generous, suspiciously so. Elizabeth recognized the trap. Accept and they'd be indebted to Charles. Refuse and lose everything. "We need time to consider," Nathan said firmly. That night, as they discussed their options, a commotion outside drew their attention. "Tom," Reynolds burst in, wide-eyed with fear. "Carson's men took my boy. Left a note. They want me to recant my testimony or they'll kill him." Horror gripped Elizabeth, an innocent child caught in their war. "We'll get him back," Nathan promised grimly. "How? We don't even know where Carson's hiding." But Nathan's expression had changed. "Actually, I might. There's a place in the mountains, an old Apache hideout. Few white men know about it." Within an hour, Nathan had assembled a rescue party. Elizabeth insisted on joining despite his protests. "That's my student they took," she argued, "and this is our fight." The ride into the mountains was treacherous, following paths barely wide enough for horses. Nathan led them unerringly, his Apache heritage evident in every decision. Near dawn, they reached a hidden canyon. Below, campfire smoke revealed Carson's location. 6 men plus Carson, Nathan whispered after scouting. The boys in that tent. What followed required stealth rather than firepower. Using skills learned from his mother's people, Nathan led them down silent paths. They positioned themselves around the camp, waiting for his signal. The attack was swift and precise. Nathan himself burst into the tent, emerging moments later with young Tommy Reynolds in his arms. Gunfire erupted as Carson's men realized what was happening, but surprise gave the rescuers an advantage. In the chaos, Elizabeth found herself face to face with Carson himself. The man who'd orchestrated so much death and destruction looked smaller somehow. His fine clothes replaced by trail gear, his arrogance dimmed by desperation. "You ruined everything," he snarled, raising his pistol. Elizabeth didn't hesitate. Derringer spoke once, and Carson fell, clutching his shoulder. "No," she said coldly, "you ruined yourself." Sheriff Rawlins, part of the rescue team, quickly secured the wounded outlaw. This time, there would be no escape, no second chances. As they rode back to the ranch, Tommy safe with his father, Elizabeth felt a weight lift. One threat had ended, but another remained. Charles waited at the ranch, his proposal still on the table. But something had changed in Elizabeth during the rescue. She'd remembered who she was, not a Boston lady playing at frontier life, but a woman who'd earned her place through courage and determination. "We appreciate your offer," she told Charles firmly, "but we must decline. We'll find another way." Charles's mask slipped, revealing calculation beneath the genteel surface. "You're making a mistake. Without my help, you'll lose everything." "Perhaps," Elizabeth acknowledged, "but we'll keep our integrity." After Charles left, Nathan pulled her close. "Are you sure? It might be our only chance." "No, it's not," Elizabeth smiled. "I've been thinking. The railroad investors were impressed by our community's courage. What if we approached them about investing in the ranch? A partnership, not a takeover." Nathan's eyes lit with understanding. "Use Carson's own plan against him?" "Exactly. We have something valuable, not just land, but a functioning operation with community support. It was a gamble, but one that paid off." The railroad investors, wary after their experience with Carson, welcomed the opportunity to work with established ranchers. They provided the capital needed to clear the debts in exchange for shipping partnerships that benefited everyone. 6 weeks later, Elizabeth stood on her porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. The ranch was secure. Carson, he faced justice, and her marriage had emerged stronger from every test. Nathan joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No regrets?" "None," she replied, leaning back against him, "though I do wonder what Charles hoped to gain." "You," Nathan said simply. "He saw what I saw, a remarkable woman worth any price." Elizabeth turned in his arms. "But you were the one, willing to lose everything rather than compromise our bond, because I knew what really mattered." He kissed her softly. "Still no." As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She'd traveled west, seeking security, and found something far more precious, a love that could weather any storm, a community that stood together against tyranny, and the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The mail-order bride who'd arrived to tragedy had become a frontier woman in the truest sense, not by birth or circumstance, but by choice and character. And in choosing courage over convenience, integrity over easy solutions, she'd gained more than she'd ever dreamed possible. 2 years had transformed the valley beyond recognition. The railroad spur line brought prosperity without destruction, thanks to the cooperative agreement Elizabeth and Nathan had negotiated. Sunrise Valley Ranch had become a model of sustainable ranching, with other landowners following their lead, in balancing progress with preservation. On a crisp autumn morning, Elizabeth stood on her porch, watching their 2-year-old daughter, Anna Morningstar Blackwood, chase butterflies in the garden. The child was a perfect blend of her parents, with Nathan's dark hair and high cheekbones, but Elizabeth's green eyes and determined chin. "Mama, look!" Anna called, holding up a particularly colorful specimen. "Beautiful, darling." Elizabeth smiled, her heart full. She pressed a hand to her slightly rounded belly, where their second child grew. Nathan emerged from the barn, his face lighting up at the sight of his family. The years had added distinguished silver to his temples, but his step remained young and vital. "Letter came," he said, holding up an envelope. "From Boston." Elizabeth's eyebrows rose. Correspondence from the East had become rare since they'd settled all debts and severed ties with that world. The letter bore the seal of Bancroft and Sons. With slight trepidation, Elizabeth opened it. "Dear Mrs. Blackwood, I write with news that may interest you. Recent legislation has invalidated racial restrictions in inheritance law. Your grandfather's trust provisions are now legally void. The full amount with interest is available to you without condition. Furthermore, Charles Worthington has been arrested for fraud. It seems he was deeply in debt and had planned to use your trust money to cover his losses. His proposal to help was merely a scheme to gain control of your assets. Justice, it appears, has prevailed on all fronts." Elizabeth handed the letter to Nathan, who read it with growing amazement. $40,000 plus 20 years of interest, he calculated. "That's a fortune," Elizabeth finished, "and completely unnecessary now." They looked at each other and burst out laughing. The irony was perfect. The money that had once seemed so crucial now arrived when they needed it least. "What should we do with it?" Nathan asked. Elizabeth considered. "Create a fund for the town, scholarships for children like Anna who bridged 2 worlds. The Elizabeth and Nathan Blackwood Foundation," he mused, "supporting education and cultural understanding." That evening, they hosted their weekly dinner for ranch employees and neighbors. The tradition had started small, but grown to encompass most of the valley. Sarah Mills, now Sarah Sullivan, after marrying Jake, helped serve, while Tom Reynolds entertained with his fiddle. Sheriff Rawlins, considerably grayer, but still sharp-eyed, raised his glass. "To the Blackwoods, who showed us that courage and community can overcome any obstacle." As glasses clinked, Elizabeth caught Nathan's eye across the room. The connection between them had only deepened with time, built on shared trials and triumphs. Later, as guests departed and Anna slept peacefully in her room, Elizabeth and Nathan sat on their porch swing, watching stars emerge in the vast western sky. "Do you ever think about how different life might have been?" Nathan asked quietly. Elizabeth considered. "If I'd married Henry or returned to Boston, sometimes, but I wouldn't change anything. Not even the hardships, especially not those." She took his hand. "They brought me to you. They made us who we are." A comfortable silence fell, broken only by night sounds, crickets, a distant coyote, the whisper of wind through cottonwoods. "I've been thinking," Nathan said eventually, "about expanding our work with the Apache community, building bridges between the reservation and town." Elizabeth nodded. "Anna should know both sides of her heritage. All our children should. The Tribal Council has invited us to the harvest celebration next month. They want to honor you." "Me?" Elizabeth was surprised. "Why?" "For standing up to Carson, for treating everyone with respect, for raising a child who represents the future they hope for." Nathan smiled. "You've become something of a legend among my mother's people." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A young woman stepped off the stage, clutching a worn carpet bag, her eyes wide with apprehension. Elizabeth, in town for supplies, witnessed the familiar scene. "Are you Mrs. Blackwood?" the woman asked hesitantly. "I am." I'm Clara Bennett. I answered an advertisement. Mr. Jameson was supposed to meet me, but... Her voice trailed off, tears threatening. Elizabeth's heart clenched with recognition. Let me guess. He's not what you expected? Clara nodded miserably. He's twice my age and drunk. I won't... Without hesitation, Elizabeth took the girl's arm. Come with me. We'll sort this out. At the ranch, Clara's story emerged, one painfully familiar to Elizabeth. An orphan from Philadelphia, she'd sought a new life through a matrimonial advertisement, only to find deception waiting. You can stay. Here while you decide what to do, Elizabeth offered. We always need teachers at the school. Nathan, watching his wife comfort the frightened girl, felt his love deepen further. Elizabeth had transformed from a lost soul seeking rescue to someone who provided sanctuary for others. That evening, as Clara settled into the guest room, Nathan found Elizabeth in their bedroom, brushing her hair before the mirror. You're building quite a collection of strays, he teased gently. I was a stray once, she reminded him. Someone took me in, and look what happened. He kissed her neck. I fell completely in love with her. Elizabeth turned in his arms. Do you know what today is? October 12th, he replied promptly. 3 years since you stepped off that stage. 3 years since my life truly began. She touched his face tenderly. I came seeking a husband and found a partner, a protector, a friend. I expected a simple existence and discovered a grand adventure. Any regrets about the adventure? Only that it took tragedy to bring us together. Elizabeth's eyes misted. I wish Henry could see what we've built on the foundation of his dreams. He knows, Nathan said with quiet certainty. Somehow, he knows. The harvest celebration at the reservation proved transformative. Elizabeth watched Anna play with Apache children, no barriers of language or culture between them. The tribal elders presented her with a blanket woven in traditional patterns, symbolizing her acceptance into their community. Grandmother Sage, more ancient but still sharp-minded, took Elizabeth's hands. You have the spirit of a warrior, she declared. Not all battles are fought with weapons. Some are won with courage of the heart. As they rode home under a full moon, Anna sleeping against her father's chest, Elizabeth felt profound contentment. The woman who'd arrived seeking a traditional life had created something entirely new. A bridge between worlds, a family that defied convention, a legacy of courage and compassion. What are you thinking? Nathan asked softly. About circles, Elizabeth replied. How life brings us back to where we started, but changed. Clara arriving as I once did. Anna playing where you played as a child. The ranch thriving where others tried to destroy. And us? Us most of all. She smiled at him across their sleeping daughter. I came west to marry a stranger and found my soulmate. Lost one future and gained a better one. As they approached their ranch, lights glowing warmly in the windows, Elizabeth felt the truth of her words. Every hardship had led to this moment, this man, this child, this life she couldn't have imagined, but now couldn't imagine living without. The mail-order bride who'd arrived to find her groom dead had discovered something far more valuable than the security she'd sought. She'd found herself, her strength, her purpose, and in the process she'd helped reshape a community, bridge cultural divides, and create a new kind of family, under the vast Arizona sky, with her husband beside her. And their daughter safe between them, Elizabeth Blackwood knew she was exactly where she belonged. The journey that had begun in tragedy had led to triumph, not through conquest or compromise, but through courage, compassion, and the unshakable conviction that love, true love, could overcome any obstacle. As they reached home, Nathan helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood. Home, Elizabeth repeated, savoring the word. Yes, that's exactly what this is. Together they walked into their house, into their future, into the life they'd built from the ashes of loss and the foundations of hope. The circle was complete, but the story, their story, was really just beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.